Well, it's time for our final project of the semester. What do you think we should do?
In the past 10 years we've been doing the wall shelf. It's getting a little boring.
I like the hand router sign.
Wonder if there's a way we could combine them. Welcome to the Warrior Woodshop. I'm Mr. Rodaway.
I'm Mr. Mertens.
I'm Mr. Sputo.
This year, how long have we done that wall shelf project now, you and I together?
Well, ever since I've been here, I think, so it's going on 14 years now.
14, 15 years, it just...
Same thing since I've been here.
We'd like to introduce Mr. Sputo. He's our newest addition to the Warrior Woodshop, so you'll start seeing him in some more of our videos. But the biggest thing I've seen in this one is we want the kids to come up with their own ideas, and what have you noticed year after year?
Well, you know, they're not all really creative, so they'll copy the backboards or they'll copy the brackets, and they're not putting their own twist into it.
So our last department meeting, we said, what if we combine the two and have them router something into it, meaning the backboard there, and part of the assignment is to actually theme the shelf. So if you're in our class, you need to go with a theme here. You're going to see in this video, we're actually going to take the Warrior Woodshop logo and theme our brackets to match up with the rest of the shelf. So part of your grade is creative. If you're watching this on YouTube, hopefully you can get something out of this, but if you're one of our students, start thinking. Also, if you're one of our students, the video at the bottom will have steps, so that way you can follow along which step we're doing. And there should be a link in the description if you're not in our class and want to download those steps. So what do you say we get started on this project?
Let's get it going.
Let's get after it.
We need to start off by going to the lumber room and getting our material out. All right, here we are in the lumber room. Our plan calls for a 5.5 inch wide board.
So we've got this huge board. What can we do to make it easier on the kids when we're over at the miter saw? What do you think?
Well, if we cut these to a rough cut size, it'll be easier to handle smaller pieces of wood. You know, it's not the final length, so they can make their accurate cuts with a more manageable piece of wood.
I think that's a reasonable approach. So you'll lay them out the rough cut and we'll head over to the miter saw.
Rough cutting is when you add about 1 to 2 inches to the finished length of your piece, just so you can get it to more of a workable state and you're not handling a large board. Now the final project has 4 pieces. However, we're only going to rough cut 3 boards. The reason for that is if I was to rough cut this to 8 inches, which is the 7-inch bracket plus 1 inch, I'm not going to have room to put the clamps on while I'm doing the drill press operation. So to alleviate that problem, let's go ahead and make this board twice as long at about 18 inches. That gives us room for 1 bracket here and 1 bracket on this side. And that way, while we're drilling the holes in 1 bracket, we can clamp on the other half of the board. And then once all the drill operations are completed, we'll bandsaw it into 2 different pieces.
Okay, at this point, we want to square up the ends. Now remember, squaring up the end of the board means to cut it at 90 degrees to the edge of the board. Going to make sure the saw's set at 0 again, or 90 degrees. Going to set up our board now. And we're going to remember squaring off means to cut off 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. Okay, now on this third piece for the brackets, after we make our first cut, we want to go ahead and flip the board around and make another cut on that side and square that edge up also, so we have both edges square at the same time. And I like to make a little mark here so I know that it's square.
Alright, so we're going to lay out the location for our screw holes. Alright, now when you do this, make sure you have your plans in front of you. What I find useful is to label my board with the wall side and the top side. All right, so I can write that on my board. All right, so I can always keep it oriented. We're gonna lay out the location for our counterbore holes for the screws. We're gonna create a mirror image so that when we cut this out, the holes are on opposite sides so that they're on the outside of the wall shelf so that we can put our screw holes in the proper spot. So we look at our plans, we read the dimensions on how far down the holes are. We mark those on both sides. All right, we also need to know how far the hole is away from the wall. So we can read that off our plans, mark that, mark the other side as well. And then you have your board with our holes locations marked.
Now on the third piece for the brackets, we don't need to cut this again yet. We've got both sides squared. Now we're going to lay out the actual brackets on our board, and there's a variety of ways that we can do this. It's something real easy. You could take a roll of tape, set it where you want it, however you want the arc, you can do whatever you like there. Roll of tape, can of paint, something with a circular edge on it if that's what you want.
The brackets need to be upside down of each other. That creates a right and a left. Here we are with the drill press. We're going to do our counterboard holes in the side brackets only at this time. We're going to do the shelf a little bit later. What we've done is we've set up a 3/8 Forstner bit, leaves that flat bottom. We're 3/8 from the edge, kind of see a theme going here, and we're going to go 3/8 deep. So let's get started on the drilling. So I've got this set up to where I can start on the first hole, slide it along, hit the second hole, and so on and so forth. Remember, you saw in the last step, the brackets need to be upside down of each other. That creates a right and a left. All right, now that I'm back from the drill press, I'm just over here at one of the bench vices. If you don't have that, you can clamp it to the table. We've got us a cordless drill set up, high speed for drilling, 1/8" drill bit, right where the center point of the Forstner bit left a little dimple. Then we're going to finish out the hole with the 1/8". All right, we're going for what we're calling it a themed wall shelf, and since we're making a Warrior Woodshop wall shelf, we're going to make some little saw blade brackets. Kind of looking, but the situation we're running into to make this a true saw blade is we wouldn't have our square edges. So we're going to do what's called a positive negative. We're going to bandsaw out half the blade, and we're going to carve the other half of the blade. This is a cool feature. However, if you're in our class, you've got to think about time management. It is going to take some more time. So make sure that you're willing to put the extra time in or have it available. So what I'm going to do is carve out all the top half of the saw blade, and then I'll meet you back over at the bandsaw. So let me get started.
Okay, now we're coming over to the bandsaw. We're going to cut out our brackets. First, we're going to cut these apart down the middle, and I've got a helper who's going to come over here and help me do that. Okay, now that we have these apart, we're going to go ahead and cut our curves. Now, remember, when you're cutting curves, you should be using relief cuts.
All right, so now that I've got my profile or design routed, I'm back over at the bandsaw, and I'm actually stealing a page out of the jigsaw book. These inside curves of the saw blade design are a little too tight, so I went ahead and took a drill and drill them out, so it's going to save a lot of time and it'll avoid me having to twist the blade. So we'll go ahead and start making these cuts, and we'll go right there. And this was 100. One of the things you want to do also is soften up any corners, just to kind of give it a more of a finished feel.
We're on step 11. We're going to cut our back. We're going to square up our backboard, then we're going to cut it to length.
At this point, I'm coming back to the table, the benches here, to make my final measurements. That'll open up the saws for anybody else who needs to use them. You can get your measuring done here.
Old school carbon or transfer paper and a large pattern. You don't need much tape. You want to create what's called, what I refer to as a hinge. So this allows me to lift it and check what I've traced, what I haven't. If you're doing this at home, you can do what you want, but in our class, we reuse these carbon sheets over and over, so students are not allowed to cut, tape these down. Basically, we're going to put it under one side, trace our letters, then move it over to the other side and finish tracing the other half of our letter or design. If you didn't, you can still freehand this drawing. You can print 2 sheets of paper and tape it together if you're trying to do this project at home. Multiple ways. This is just a method we found that works. All right. In our class, we don't suggest the students throwing away their pattern, because you've always got the other side of the board if you happen to not get satisfactory results. So put this in your binder, file it away in the workbench, whatever you're working at. So now it's time to pull out the router and start carving our letters. All right, so now we got the router mat set up with our backboard. We're gonna go ahead and use a V-bit on this one. However, there's 3 typical bits that we use a lot in sign carving. The V-bit is one of them. Core box is another. It's kind of a U-shape or a bullnose, some people call it. And then there's a straight or a flat bottom. We've got a whole video on how just to make the signs, and that's pretty much what we're doing here. We're just attaching it to a shelf. So if you want more information on how that's done, the whole process, go ahead and watch that video. But let me get started making our backboard. There we are. And then we'll move on to the messy part.
Messy part? What? This kind of looks like the messy part. I'm going to have sawdust in my hair for weeks.
Don't overdo it on the paint. It takes less than you think. And for those of you that can't paint, you don't have to be perfect. Just make sure you get all the edges. After the paint's had 4 hours to dry, check with your instructor and determine what method you're going to use to sand off the excess paint.
At this point, we've already cut out our brackets, and if you would like, you can actually cut a little arc on the corner of your board instead of having it square like we're going to do here, and I'm going to cut that now. Okay, I finished on the bandsaw, and remember I left a little bit extra to my line. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clamp this to the table, and before I start sanding, I'm going to shape this a little bit more because I left quite a bit extra. What we have here are two types of files. We have a rough file to take the material off a little bit quicker, then we have a file that will actually smooth it a little bit, and then we'll finish with some sandpaper. What you're going to want to do is take the rougher file, if you got quite a bit left, clamp your board down, such as I have done here. Now using both hands, using a stroke at about a 45-degree angle, we're going to start shaping our wood.
Use a table router to router 3 edges of your shelf board, the 2 ends and the front, but not the back side. It's encouraged to do what's called a cleanup pass to ensure that you have a perfect edge, which means just run it through a second time without adjusting any bits. This will guarantee you got a smooth edge all the way through.
Now it's on to everybody's favorite step in the whole process, sanding. Not really, I know. But sanding is one of those necessary evils. It's a lot easier to sand while they're individual pieces at this point. But if you look at this, you're trying to sand in this corner in here, it's not going to have very good results. So let's sand all the pieces individually. Start out with a rough grit sandpaper, like an 80 or 100. This would be the number in reference. We went our way up to 120, 150, and finally we finished it all up with a 220. That should make it nice and smooth. If you have to ask yourself, have I sanded enough? Then you probably haven't. Keep that in mind. Now if I can sand off Sharpie marker, you should be able to sand off pencil marks.
We gotta get glue and screws.
It'd be nice if we had something to like hold them together. Don't you think?
There's multitudes of ways. We've got on our tables, we've got a vise that you could clamp it vertically and put one down. That's still a little bit of a challenge. All right, again, there's multiple ways. The one that we have the most access to in class is a bar clamp. So what we're gonna do is put a little bit of glue. All right, since you're the new guy, how much working time do they have once they put glue on?
About 5 minutes.
About 5 minutes. So you want to make sure you've got everything ready. So this clamp, you're not running to grab this clamp right now. You're not smearing glue all over the place. And what we're going to do is use this clamp as a straight edge. Let me slide that over a little bit. Squeeze it tight. Just snug. We're not putting the Hulk grip on it. Look good. And what that's done is left this bottom hole exposed. So now we can take our impactor drill. I'm going to put one of those in there. And if you check with the instructor as to what screws you're using, because we're using oak, we've got to use a fine thread self-tapping screw. You're going to find this a lot easier if you can work with a partner. Spin this around. While you're cleaning the glue up, let's remind the kids why we use a wet rag and not a dry rag. Glue will dry clear. You think, well, what's the big deal then? The problem is it creates a barrier which is going to prevent the stain from soaking through. So make sure when you're cleaning the glue off that you use a wet rag to get any squeeze out. Looks good. And there's our base. Not too bad. Let's move on to the shelf. One of the biggest changes that we've made from the older shelf to the theme shelf is we used to have the kids cut or go ahead and drill all of their counterbores at the start. The problem is if their measuring isn't up to par, you end up with ones like this. These inside holes here are where the plan says they should be. Unfortunately, their backboard was too long and we had to re-drill for the outside. So that's why if you're wondering, or if you're not, why we haven't drilled any holes in the top piece is because we want to make it fit this exact. What would you tell a student to get their marks transferred from here to here?
So there is a bunch of different ways, but what I would do is I would take my shelf, I would put it upside down, I'd put the brackets on top of it, I'd make sure that it's centered where I want it. Once it's centered, I'm going to draw an outline of my project on all sides so that when I take it off, I can see exactly where the outline of this is so that I can make sure I put the holes in the right spot in the center of these boards.
Now that we got all the holes laid out on our top shelf, we're back to the drill press, and we're going to follow the same procedures as we did when we were doing the brackets for counterbore holes. 3/8 drill bit, 3/8 from the edge, except for the two sides, and 3/8 deep. So again, that 3/8 theme. All right, now that we got our 3/8 counterbores drilled, we're going to follow back through with the 1/8 pre-drill. The printed instructions say do it with a cordless drill. You got the choice, but you understand you drill the pilot hole through just as we did on the side brackets. All right, now that that's all sanded and assembled, we got our top, everything's prepped and ready to go there, routed edges, everything's sanded. It's time to assemble it. There's, again, multiple ways you can do this. One of the simplest and most efficient, as we found, is with a table vise.
Now, before you do that, would you not want to ruin the front of your project? You know, maybe put a...
What we're referring to is this is a great method to hold it, but metal's going to win. So what we want to do is take just a simple scrap, and it needs to be shorter than the back wall, and just snug it up. There's no need to romp with this thing. So now we'll apply the glue, get our top in position, get everything lined up, and follow it up with screws. I recommend starting with the back ones first.
Again, we're going to use the clamps. Partner helps to make sure everything's lined up. And you want to make sure it's flush along the bottom. Something you didn't think about when you were designing your back is having a flat spot along the back piece allows this, you're able to use clamps in this step. Otherwise, you're going to have to do it by feel. Okay, we snugged up. Snug everything up. And again, that will pull it tight. Before I attach some of these screws, I'm checking the back with my finger. Make sure everything's flush. Be careful not to drive it too deep, especially if you're using a soft wood like we do in our class project. You can actually drive it right through the top piece, depending on how deep your counterbore is. Once you hear the impact driver change sound, that's probably good.
Okay, after you get that done, don't forget, you got a lot of glue that's squeezed out along the edge. Take your wet rag, clean that up. All right, so what do you think so far?
I think our sign looks pretty good. Our wall shelf.
So next step is take some of the scrap and make some plugs.
Yeah, take some more scrap, fill those holes in so everything looks good.
Where'd you put the scrap?
Where'd you put the scrap? I told you to put it away.
Oh, really?
Whose is that?
It's a cutoff from one of the other projects in the other class. It doesn't match though. That might actually look kind of cool.
It could look cool.
One of the actual phrases you've always heard in sports, if you can't beat them, join them. Well, woodworking has a similar phrase, if you can't hide them, highlight it. Even though we're plugging these holes, it's not going to make the circles invisible. Let's be realistic. So since we're not going to completely make them invisible or concealed by using a darker wood, it's actually going to highlight it. The key to this though is these holes are symmetrical. It'll look kind of tacky if one's closer to the front than the other. So as long as you do a good job of drilling, this is an option to use an opposite colored wood to give you some contrast and make it go with your theme.
If you did keep any of your scrap, especially like from your side brackets, you can cut plugs from that, but one thing you do, like make sure the grain lines line up so it looks like it's flowing.
If you're running out of time, another option we do a lot of times on our tissue box project is use these buttons. I don't think they'll look as good on the top. They look real good on the sides, but it would help. So there's all kinds of options you can do depending on what time you got, how much time you got left in class.
This one was where the wood matches, but you can still kind of see that the circle's there.
So we're gonna head over to the Pro Press, cut our plugs. We'll show you how to do one. Obviously it'll be a repeat of all 10 steps. So for plugs, just take a flat bladed screwdriver, put it in there, and just gently pop. And that should knock the plugs loose. And then after that, the key a lot of students make is they put the glue on top of the screw. The glue, what the glue needs to do is actually get on the side so it contacts the side, wood to wood. So just a decent drop, have a wet rag ready. And what I found is when you put it in there to twist a little bit, so and then give it a little persuasive tap. And we'll just repeat the process.
Right down. That's it. That's it.
What are these for?
They're hiding the screws. Good.
The key to this is not digging the saw into the thing, so you want to leave this a little bit proud. Once the plugs have had time for the glue to dry, you can use a small handsaw and sandpaper to smooth and flush. When it comes to sanding the plugs flat, you want to make sure you go with the grain, which not this way. You want to go this way.
All right, now that everything's assembled, all the plugs are sanded off, you want to go back over one more time with 220 grit and just, it's called soften up all your edges. Making sure there's no sharp corners, everything feels smooth, you get rid of all the burn marks. Next step will be to apply the finish. And remember, the quality of the finish is solely based on the quality of the sanding job. Do a bad job of sanding, you're not going to get a smooth finish. Take your time, do this step correctly. When it comes to applying a finish and stain, you have a variety of options. Stain is going to color the wood. The finish is going to protect the wood. In class, you'll have a couple choices of stain color, a light and a dark. You can take it home and paint it if you'd like. Paint has usually got a finish built into it, but if you go ahead and stain it, you're going to need to apply a finish later. That can be done at home with a wipe-on polyurethane or a brush-on lacquer, or it can be done here with a can of paste wax and put 3 coats of paste wax on and buff it. We're going to go ahead and put a natural stain on and bring out the color of this wood.
Well, there it is.
Is that golden oak stain you got on there?
Nope, that's actually an aerosol clear coat finish. It darkens it up a little bit. What other?
Why didn't you stain it?
Well, think about trying to brush stain. What's going to happen when the brush hits those letters?
You're probably getting a letter.
Yeah, so they have to hand rub it, which consistencies.
It makes sense.
Yeah. Cool.
How are you gonna put it on the wall?
That's their problem to figure out.
Glue, right?
There we go.
Double stick tape?
Now, the way the original project is designed is you locate a couple studs in the wall, but that's kind of permanent. But if you're going to put trophies or something heavy on there, I think that's definitely what you want to do. You got any other suggestions?
If we hung like a hanging bracket on the back of it, and you could use one of those things for picture frames.
I would call them alligator clips. I've heard them called that, sawtooth hangers.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of names for them. Alligator, sawtooth.
You just gotta be careful on how much weight you put on those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just near a little finish nail. You were talking about something with a router bit. What was your thought there?
Well, as far as the hanging, it's called a keyhole bit. Basically, it is what it is. It's a router bit that goes down into the wood, and it's got a smaller router bit above it, and as you move it, it creates two different routes in there. So you can put a screw in there, and then when it slides up there, it won't pull out.
So kind of a T-slot.
Yeah.
That honestly would be the best of both, because the thing with the alligator clips is going to keep it away from the wall.
It's a little bit, yeah.
The challenge, what's the biggest challenge though with that keyhole bit?
It's got to be lined up perfectly. When you hang it, you got to have a perfectly level line as well.
Maybe we'll get around to getting them a jig set up, but right now, so where we screwing it to the wall or alligator clips are kind of our options this year. So not too bad overall, I'd say. You guys got any critiques? I mean, we kind of did it together as a group.
Really liking the walnut pegs.
Yeah,
Plugs.
I agree there.
Cherry might have looked good too.
What's the phrase? If you can't hide it, highlight it. So we went with that.
I think we could have probably routed into the back side of the brackets the rest of the sawtooth, so that would have continued around.
It didn't look bad when we were making the brackets, but when it all came together, it's like,
When I look at it now, it's kind of like it just looks
That
plain
looks
from-
cool.
Yeah, that looks, but from the inside, it looks kind of plain.
what I would have liked to have done was, since the class logo has the warrior head in there, but I thought that'd be a little tight to, we're trying to keep this at a beginner level, and I don't even think I could have got something that small, so.
And even an alternate, since it's a saw blade, you could have drilled a hole through the middle of it, like a saw blade has.
So, we're going through the critique here, guys. If you're in our class, you're probably going to be filling that out as part of your project evaluation. And this is only our first semester final project. We're going to move on to a furniture unit. So the critiques that maybe I should have sanded a little more, we did a real good job of getting the glue cleaned up. Those are things that when you roll into the table or the rifle rack or the dartboard cabinet, you can't just forget about the oopses and I wish I could have wouldas on this project, even though we're not redoing this again. So overall, I'd say that beats the old one. Kind of got the theme going, I like it. So it was kind of cool to see some of the old clips in there though.
We're missing somebody though.
He couldn't get out of class. He was still in high school when we made the first one.
That's because he was sleeping in class.
That's true. Well, overall, I think we did a pretty good job, so all I have to tell the kids to go out there and do is go out and make some sawdust.